The Rams, they're stuck. So to me, Justin, as we kind of go down and look at some of these situations and teams sort of giving up on some of the guys like Mariota in Tennessee and now what appears to be Carr in Oakland and things like that, I think ultimately Dalton in Cincinnati, I don't think the Rams are in any kind of position where they can give up on Goff. So this might be a bad year, but I think they go back into 2020, fiscal year 2020 for the NFL. They go back into that year and it's all in on Goff again if you're the Rams. Whereas the Bears, I don't think you're all in on Trubisky at this point.
Well, I think the premise of the question was the contract situation where the Rams went out and they gave Goff 4 years and $134 million, 110 of it's guaranteed. They don't have really a potential out until 2023. So they are absolutely stuck. There is no divorce that's really possible here unless another team is willing to somehow trade for Goff, and they are not going to get any type of compensation back because that other team would basically be taking a huge contract off their hands. So they're stuck with him. And that comes the point of the question. Would you rather be stuck with a guy that you're not sure about and have that $30+ million a year sitting on your cap, or be a team that has a ton of questions, but you don't have the financial responsibility locked into one guy? So I think I would rather be the Bears.
Well, I think I answered that for you. I just didn't do it in the way that you wanted.
Well, I was making your point for you where you don't have to be in or out on Goff. It's just the situation the Rams have put themselves in by just coming out of nowhere with we'll just give him $4 and $134 million. I mean, the happiest person outside of Jared Goff was Dak Prescott because he's like, this guy gets this much money. Look at what I've done. So I think
if you're a businessman, you got to feel better about the Bears. They're just not as financially strapped. And that's why I said they paid Goff, Cooks, and Gurley all that money and don't have another first-round pick till 2022. They're screwed.
And look, the Bears aren't in that great a shape because they don't have a first this year. So you're right. They probably are going to have to go the veteran route. And there's going to be names out there of different quarterbacks that are going to be guys like you named a few of them. There's going to be guys out there from a veteran standpoint. So maybe they find a stopgap. Maybe they go into
Teddy Bridgewater.
Teddy Bridgewater's another guy. Maybe they take a chance on him and he gets his own team again. I mean, he didn't play badly. I think he rushed Drew Brees back for sure.
Yeah,
he made him come back in this game. And look, I don't know that the Raiders are necessarily over Derek Carr. They had a really bad performance in a classic trap game where they had Kansas City on the horizon. They got to go west to east, playing that 1:00 spot, and the Jets were just waiting there to pounce on them. And they end up pulling Carr in that game, but that game was over at that point. The problem has been going into this year was there was a lot of talk. Do the Raiders, are they going to make a move for Kyler Murray? Gruden seems to be smitten with him. He doesn't seem to want Carr. And then all of a sudden it was a love fest on Hard Knocks for Carr. And now you see that they've played well and everybody seems to be getting along, but maybe there were some cracks in the armor. So what do you think about this situation? Was this just a bad week? Let's press the reset button. No need to get anybody hurt. We're going to put all our eggs in the Kansas City basket. Or do you see something here in the future where Gruden's maybe not sold on Carr, despite the fact that they really don't have a lot of weapons after what Antonio Brown did to him in the offseason?
Yeah, I don't think that's a mutually exclusive thing. I think it's both. I think that they didn't want to get Carr injured because they're going to finish out the season with a mixture of him in there probably most of the way. But I also don't think they're going to keep him after this year. And ultimately, I just don't think Gruden and Carr are good for each other. Gruden he's a rough, foul-mouthed, hard individual. And I just don't think Carr is that way. And I think ultimately they just don't match up. Hard Knocks was interesting to see how that all kind of played out, but they're just never on the same page. They just haven't been for a couple of years. I think ultimately Carr's going to be better off moving on. I'm not sold on the idea that Carr is not an NFL quarterback yet. I just don't think his situation there in Oakland, I think it's out. I think his welcome is over and he just needs fresh scenery because it's not going to work out there. And I think ultimately the Raiders will move on.
Well, Eric, as bad as the week it was for Carr, maybe the guy that had the worst 10-day stretch in the NFL has to be Mason Rudolph. The guy got blasted in the head with a helmet. 6 days later, he gets accused of throwing out a racial slur, and then he gets benched in a game against the Bengals for a guy named Duck, and now he's lost his starting job. So all this talk about the Steelers, what were they going to do? Is there a backup plan in terms of the quarterback position if Mason Rudolph's not the guy? What are they doing with his first-round pick? It's gone now for Minkah Fitzpatrick. I think the Steelers are a team right now that better be watching Ben Roethlisberger's rehab very, very closely and hope he comes back from this next year because this is a team that doesn't seem like they have any direction at the quarterback position, because the guys on their roster, Eric, I don't think are guys that you want to go into next year with if Roethlisberger's not ready to go at this point.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I mean, especially I've had Smith-Schuster on my fantasy team, and he's been nowhere. And I don't think it's completely his fault, although he's been battling some minor injuries and nagging injuries throughout the year. But clearly, much the same as when, you had Antonio Brown, I remember a couple years ago, and Roethlisberger went out, and I think wasn't it Landry Jones was playing or something?
Mike Vick for a little bit, then it was Landry Jones. Yep.
And you saw your numbers for Antonio Brown just go completely out of the window. And the same thing has happened for a guy like Smith-Schuster, who was supposed to be this, I'm going to take over the wide receiver one position in Pittsburgh. I'm the guy. Well, you put Mason Rudolph in there, and the receivers have all disappeared. There's just nobody that's effective. And I think the Steelers' record shows it. And now the Steelers have a little bit of a sample size on Mason Rudolph to know I don't think he's the future there. So whether Duck is going to do anything, who knows? But I think it's now a waiting game for the last 5 games of the season. You just get through this year. I think the reality is they're not going to make the playoffs. I think they're going to lose more games just because of the division they play in. Quite frankly, I think Cleveland's going to beat them this coming week. So this season's probably over for them. And I think Mason Rudolph's just not their future.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I can't argue that. We haven't seen him do anything that makes you look at the situation and feel like, okay, he's shown signs that he can be the guy. They have struggled on the offensive side of the ball ever since he took over. And it has been their defense really that has kept them in games and won them games, because they went through a stretch where they were scoring defensive touchdowns every single week. And if you look at them from a fantasy standpoint, I mean, they just had a torrent stretch of just double-digit fantasy performances from a defense. And that means they're getting sacks, they're getting turnovers, they're getting touchdowns if they're doing that. He did nothing for them on the offensive side. And to go into Cincy and struggle like that when they're playing Ryan Finley and they don't even want to win football games. At this point, they're 2 games clear and they're going back to Dalton now. So it makes me think this was tactical in the standpoint of it gave them a reason not to win games. They're not playing AJ Green. It doesn't look like he's going to be on the field for them at all. Then they throw Ryan Finley in, another guy that probably nobody has ever heard of outside when the story broke that they were benching Dalton. Now they're going back to Dalton. Was that just simply a move just to ensure the tank at this point, Eric?
You could say that. I mean, the guy
was they really trying to see what they had in Ryan Finley? I mean, did they really believe that was the guy that was going to move the needle for them?
I'd have to believe that they want to win at least one football game. And I guess maybe I'm just looking at it like Pollyanna. They want to do what's right and what's best, but they wanted to win with Dalton. They thought, okay, he's not going to get it done. We'll put Finley in there. Maybe the change will do something. He didn't get it done. Maybe Dalton could get us one win as we close out the year. But Mason Rudolph and Marcus Mariota are tied for the last place in QBR in the league. So we just brought up Mason Rudolph. Well, guess what? Andy Dalton's only 2 positions better than that. So I don't think this change really makes any difference for the Bengals, but I think they're just trying to change things around and hopefully go 1-15. That's my only look on it. Is I don't think it's more of a tank. I think it's more of just let's keep changing something so that we can try to get a win. And by the way, I drafted Joe Mixon in fantasy too, and that was a complete disaster.
I think Dalton could also be a guy that ends up popping up as one of these veteran guys. Somehow through trade release.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That he ends up on one of these kind of fringe teams that maybe need a quarterback change at this point, that he's got to be an upgrade over Trubisky. I'll give you 2 quick ones before
even if he's a bridge for a draft year, even if he's a Chicago bridge for 2 years until they have a first rounder.
Yeah, I think that's totally plausible. So I'll give you 2 quick ones before we get out here on the NFL. Ryan Tannehill now 4-1 with Tennessee. I don't think anybody saw that coming, but do you feel like the way he's played, he's earned the right to go into next year as the starter for the Titans?
For the Titans, yes, not for just any NFL team. But, that's a guy.
He should be the starter for the Chiefs. I mean, obviously the Titans are pretty quarterback desperate if they're playing Tannehill anyways.
Well, we're in the section of the show where we're talking about 20 teams that need a guy. I mean, maybe a Chicago, a Denver, a team like that who's trying to get somewhere for the future. Although I guess Denver might try out your boy Locke, but No, either way, I think Tannehill, yes, has earned his spot for the Titans because, as we just pointed out, Mariota is just done for the Titans. He may go somewhere else or he may be done forever. I don't know. I don't really know if he even wants to play anymore at this point. He's been through so much, kind of like Andrew Luck. But yeah, I think for the Titans, I'd be comfortable with, the GM and the ownership saying, yeah, let's give this guy another year. He's not that far removed from being the next up and comer, for Miami. And it didn't work out there, as a lot of people don't seem to, like a Josh Rosen either. But yeah, I don't know. He's just not a quarterback that excites me, really. So do I even care if he's the starter for Tennessee or not? That division is just so, you'd have to say that the future in that division still revolves around the Texans to some degree, hopefully the Jaguars, and then ultimately the Colts, because the Titans are fourth run in that division, in that conference. And so whether you give it to Tannehill or not, does it really matter?
I think he's earned the right because really with Tennessee, as bad as they were, this was a team that went into Denver and got shut out. And they actually had to turn it over to Tannehill at that point. And then it was kind of like a scramble drill. And once they've actually put him in as the starter, he's played well for them and kept them in the playoff picture. So I absolutely think that he's earned the right at this point, unless they absolutely look horrible and just fall apart the last 5 games of the season. He's given that team a lot of life at this point in a division now that's pretty wide open outside of really the way that Houston has played. The Colts are dealing with a ton of injuries at this point. So I think the 6th spot in the playoffs is wide open, and Tennessee is as good a shot as anybody. They have a pretty tough schedule down the stretch. So, but I think at least Tannehill, hey, they battled the Chiefs. They beat them at home. They waxed Jacksonville. So I think they're a team to kind of keep an eye on. Last question for you, Eric. Daniel Jones, he came in his first start. It took a missed field goal from Tampa, but Daniel Jones got his first win. Everybody from the Giants, David Gettleman in there as well, were just gloating about how great this kid was and how worthy he was of that pick. Daniel Jones has not looked great since. Look, the Giants are not a great football team, but you would like to see some kind of life, and you'd like to see your quarterback throw for over 150 yards in a game. So at what point, Eric, we don't have to do it now, but at what point do you think it starts getting discussed of, okay, maybe Daniel Jones is not quite the guaranteed Hall of Famer that everybody was trying to make him out to be in the preseason and after his first start?
Well, my answer to this might surprise you. Guaranteed Hall of Famer, yeah, way too early for that. But I think you should give this guy 2 more years. I mean,
well, I think they're going to have to, but I mean, from a media standpoint, especially New York, of what we know about them, at what point do they turn on him?
Who cares? It's again, your point earlier was well made that we're going and looking at these quarterbacks constantly with such small sample sizes. It's amazing in this day and age where you went into the season, this guy wasn't even going to play. It was going to be Eli Manning. Now we're 11 games into the season. We're saying, well, what's the future for a guy like Daniel Jones? He's got over 2,000 passing yards. He's got 17 TDs to only 8 interceptions. He's done relatively well in terms of the team around him is just terrible. Half of his receivers are in and out constantly with Shepard and Slayton and, Tate being out. And it's just, he's constantly in and out of receivers all year long. So it's not like he's got a stable situation. I still don't think the head coaching situation there is solidified. I'm not comfortable with it if I'm a New York fan, but he's middle of the league in QBR. To me, Justin, the biggest concern, he's taken 33 sacks. So offensive line remains terrible, and he's not getting rid of the ball in smart situations. He's learning by the school of hard knocks. So to me, I give this guy at least another year or 2 if you've invested that in him. And I just think we're looking at quarterbacks and making these flip decisions so quickly. And let me throw this back to you just, as we wrap up this NFL QB segment, because that's my take on Jones. But you just named teams like Miami, Pittsburgh, Cincy, Jacksonville, Oakland, Denver, the Chargers, the Bears, the Lions, the Rams, the Panthers. The list goes on of teams that are not settled at quarterback. And I go back to our Wentz conversation and think, there is a reason they did pay Wentz. And it's because he's still better than 60 to 70% of the league in terms of quarterbacks. So quarterbacks are just hard to find. And I think that's why some of these teams like a Goff, like a Wentz, they pull the trigger and make these guys big deals and try to hold on to them because you see 10 or 15 other teams just floundering with their futures up in the air because they